I'm Hannah.
Hey, I'm Zack.
And I'm filling in for Madison.
We're covering industrialization, more specifically railroads.
Steel and electricity.
And businesses. I hope you're ready because this is going to be a really fast crash course for you.
Alright, so we should probably start with a little background here. In 1856, railroads only reached as far as the Mississippi. In just 3 years, they managed to cross the Missouri.
What connected the country was the Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad was built by the Union Pacific Company and the Central Pacific Company. The goal of these railroads was to cross the country and connect previously isolated areas.
That sounds like a pretty decent idea, linking together isolated towns and places.
Of the railroads was sort of a competition too, which the Pacific Union won, and the two railroads met and connected in Cometary, Utah on May 10th, 1869.
Right. Less about the competition between them. Railroads were a dreamy new commodity that could transport riders to what was, to them, a whole new world. I can only imagine how promising it all felt. I mean, railroads promoted dreams of unlimited land, thrilling adventures, and a fresh new start for many.
Don't get too excited, buddy.
The railroads were built on the back of Chinese and Irish immigrants enslaved away in all conditions, with grueling labor and low pay, so I'd say it's not necessarily the things of dreams.
The Central Railroad had thousands of Chinese immigrant workers who usually made much less than white employees would.
Right. White workers could expect to make $40 to $60 a month for 10 hours for a 10-hour-long workday. Asian workers could expect to make $35 a month working from dawn to dusk in just as bad conditions, if not worse. Chinese workers were also expected to provide their own food, which is just, that's very unfair.
These conditions sound intolerable.
You gotta remember that many working on the railroad were the only jobs they could find.
Didn't the two railroads hire slightly different demographics?
Yep. The Union Pacific Railroad hired mostly Irish immigrants and Civil War veterans.
The conditions were so bad that in 1888, the casualties numbered more than 2,000 dead and 20,000 injured.
Jesus, that's awful.
Yeah, it sucks, but that's what happens when a group of people is taken advantage of and forced into these conditions.
Moving on from all the death, railroads were a great form of transportation, and it now took significantly less time to get from one place to another, but there was a problem. You could get on a train going from New York to Boston at noon, but when you get there, your watch is 12 minutes behind what time it actually is in Boston. Passengers would have to reset their watches many times in just one ride to the different regions.
Well, how did they fix this? I can't imagine it was tons of fun to be resetting my watch every hour.
Professor C. F. Dodd split the country into many different time zones, and in 1984, international time zones were set worldwide.
There, an easy solution.
I suppose.
Alright, let's curb the sarcasm and move on to more interesting things than time zone. Increased supply of iron and coal, as well as other railroad materials, was a response to something called supply and demand.
What's supply and demand?
Supply is essentially the goods/services that someone or business is willing to sell/supply. And demand is the amount of product that consumers are willing to buy.
Miners, lumbers, and smelters increased their outputs as a response to the sudden uptick in demands, right?
They did. Those professions were the most impacted by railroads.
Railroads brought lots of new developments, and due to towns no longer being quite so isolated, they began specializing in individual products.
Oh, I'm familiar with this one. Towns like Chicago and Minneapolis started specializing in things like stockyards and grain industry, respectively.
Quick question. What are stockyards?
Stockyards are places where cattle is kept for the meat industry.
Anyway, Florida helped spread more railroads through the area to initiate the tourism industry there. In general, though, it was much easier for towns to pop up near railroad lines, and they often did.
Let's talk about grains now. I've been very excited to talk about it.
Excited about railroad corruption?
What's with the push and pulls? And they fight up against the railroads.
Alright, well, railroad companies sold governmentally granted land to private businesses instead of to those traveling along the railroads for this land.
Don't forget that railroads also frequently switched up prices, so small load corn would end up costing freaks as much for Joe as it had for John.
Farmers were being pushed further and further into debt by the big railroad companies, and the government wasn't doing much to help them.
Can't say I'm terribly surprised. I mean, railroads would intentionally change for shorter hauls, and because all of the companies were working together, they essentially cornered farmers into having to pay for it. Otherwise, there would be no haul for their crops. Furthering profit, and the industry probably benefited those in the government.
After a while, the Grange elected officials to the government, and in 1871, Illinois authorized a commission to set a level for passenger rates and to try to prevent discrimination against individual farmers.
Yeah, the railroads really didn't like this, and they fought back hard. 1877 in Muncie, Illinois, the Supreme Court upheld the Grange laws, and the states now had a right to regulate railroads and actually make a difference.
The Supreme Court did something to actually benefit the people? Jeez.
Don't get too excited, buddy. Unfortunately, in 1886, the Supreme Court ruled that 1 last feet, Illinois and United States could not set interest rates on interstate commerce. The railroads won big time. This Overton and Muncie, Illinois.
Sounds mighty familiar.
Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act as a result of the outrage that overturning Muncie, Illinois caused, so I guess that's a win there. This act reestablished the government's right to supervise railroad activities and set up a group of people, what group was it again?
The Interstate Commerce Commission. They were supposed to regulate prices to make sure they were fair.
Of course, the ICC struggled to regulate railroads.
In 1897, after lots of court cases from the railroad companies challenged the act, the Supreme Court ruled that the ICC could not set maximum rates on the railroads. The ICC didn't even become somewhat effective until Theodore Roosevelt took office in 1906.
Wow, that sucks. I can't help but feel like the Supreme Court had some, motive or feeling towards the matter. Maybe they were paid off.
Drop the conspiracy theories. We need to move on to the Great Panic.
Panic. The what?
An economic collapse occurred in 1893 because of mismanagement, overbuilding, corporate abuses, and competition, which forced lots of railroads into bankruptcy. By the end of 1893, about 600 banks and 15,000 businesses had failed, and around 4 million people lost jobs. The recession was the worst in American history at the time.
Before the Great Depression, right?
Yeah, the Great Depression was in the 1940s.
Anyway, by 1894, a quarter of all the railroads had been taken over by financial companies. They went bankrupt and were bought by big banks like JP Morgan. When the 1900s began, 7 companies were in control of 2/3 of the United Nations railroad tracks.
That's a scary monopoly to have.
For sure.
When did the panic end?
The country only began recovering from the recession in 1997. The results of it lasted well way past that.
Anyways, after the railroad, the stage was set for the North. Businesses could now spread across America instead of staying in their hometown. But here's a problem. How will businesses get big enough for that? 2 words. Free market.
What's a free market anyways?
Well, I'm glad you asked. A free market is an economic system in which how much money a good or service costs is regulated by private businesses. Think of a lemonade stand that only charges 50 cents. And then another lemonade stand pops up right across the street for 25 cents. Because there's no competition in the market with the lower prices, the other lemonade stand now has to come up with a reason to why their prices are 50 cents higher than the other stand.
Well, what did the free market lead to? It had to have had an effect.
You know what happened? Big businesses were doing so good, they didn't want the government to tell them what to do. So they started a laissez-faire.
Isn't that when the government can't do anything about the free market?
Yes, it is. And because the government can't make laws about market regulations, big businesses are now making monopolies, and the monopolies are making tycoons.
I know what a monopoly is, but what is a tycoon? Isn't that like those Roblox games?
Superhero tycoon?
Can you be quiet? If y'all shush, I'll tell you. Tycoons are very wealthy businessmen. Some tycoons in this day and age are Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Mark Zuckerberg.
So, any rich person. Would Oprah Winfrey be a tycoon?
Of course she is. She's influential. Women can be tycoons too.
Can you all be quiet? I'll explain it if you let me talk.
Do you really need to yell all the time?
Maybe I wouldn't be yelling if y'all would stop talking. Anyways, because rich people are hogging up all the money in the United States, middle and lower class, we're trying to figure out why 17% of the population got so much money. So they came up with social Darwinism. Social Darwinism has not and will never be proven by science. Just because someone is black or white doesn't mean that they're a better or worse person. One person doesn't deserve more than another just because one is wealthy and the other is in poverty. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of racism, but what about the market? Isn't that why we're here?
That was an awful transition, but because the government isn't doing anything with the market, they're just letting tycoons do whatever they want. The market is crashing, people are being paid 20 cents an hour, if not less, and a lot of people are dying on the job because of bad working conditions. It's just a bad time all around.
I know that the government had to do something, right?
I'm just going to stare at you until you realize that you're very stupid.
Thanks, you can't be pretty and smart at the same time.
No, the government passed antitrust laws or anti-monopoly laws, so no more monopolies. The government also added a minimum wage and forced big businesses to have half-decent working conditions, so people stopped dying at work for 20 cents an hour.
Oh, cool, so how was the South during all of this?
Bad.
What?
The South was very poor. There was no business boom in the South. They, kinda suffered and stuff.
Dude, that was the worst way to end the segment.
Yeah.